Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of April of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the most important area, about Очеретино direction. Today we have a lot of geolocations, additional geolocations, but before we start I would like to discuss with you, for your understanding, two important things. Currently there are two areas of Russian control: the area that was confirmed by geolocations, that this or that building or street was captured by the Russians, and another, let's say, territory that wasn't confirmed by anything but reports from different mappers and the sources on the ground. So when talking about this one, about this area that I have just selected, this is like the area between these red lines. From this territory we haven't received even a single geolocation confirming that the Russians managed to capture, let's say, the school on the north, the industrial zone to the west, and so on. But regarding this, despite this, we have some geolocations today. And the Ukrainian sources published another video of how they were bombing the Russian forces inside of, let's say, in the high-rise building area of Очеретино, which confirms that the Russians captured this territory. We have adjusted based on that the area of real Russian control. And we have another video from the western part of Очеретино, from the railway station, or the railway, let's say, intersection of railways and the just regular road. On this video we can see, this is it, how the Ukrainians were bombing the Russian forces inside of that building. So based on these two videos, we have adjusted the map. Furthermore, we have, of course, lots of updates from different mappers. On this, for example, picture, we can see additional Russian progress according to the deep state map. And according to them, the Russians managed to break through the fields and to enter these three lines. And according to them, the Russians currently control something like this. Of course, this is significant, let's say, progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation, if it's true. But when talking about the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, during the previous 24 hours, they reported that they managed to repel few, let's say, counterattacks from the armed forces of Ukraine in the vicinity of Nova Mykolaivka. So most likely this, let's say, change, this, let's say, update of deep state map is correct. Now we are moving to Очеретино, a few more words, and then we'll move further. After, let's say, during the previous few days, we received significant number of updates, of videos, text messages. Some sources were saying that the Russians managed to establish control over gardens. Some sources were saying that the Russians have already entered Arkhangelsk. But today is 29th of April, and we still haven't received even a single geolocated video confirming that the Russians managed to, let's say, cross these red lines, so to capture anything on the top of these red lines. So I'm not saying anything. Most likely the Russians did, let's say, reach the gardens, this one, but according to Ukrainian sources and starting of today, a lot of Russian resources confirmed that the Russians control just 80-90% of the town, and 10% are still under Ukraine, remains under Ukraine control. Ceramic Nova Mykolaivka, the same situation. Most of the mappers have already updated their maps, including very reliable, let's say, analysis that the Russians established everything, let's say, to the south of the road 0544, that the Russians established complete control over Nova Mykolaivka, that Ukrainians have abandoned their positions and were forced to fall back towards Arkhangelsk. But today is 29th of April, and we still haven't received even a single video from this gray zone, from this, let's say, gray area. And this situation make us think that most likely and very likely there are still very heavy clashes, that the battle for Nova Mykolaivka and Ceramic is ongoing, that the Russians still have to do lots of things before they establish complete control over the territory. So for now, we're going to keep this area as a gray zone, and if the situation, and if during the next few days we don't receive any updates about the Russian control, then we will be forced to return the Ukraine controlled territory back and to color Ceramic and at least some part of Nova Mykolaivka once again into the yellow color. Now we are moving to the south in direction of Solovyovo. The Russians continue their offensive operation. Today we start receiving more and more videos and more updates further to the west of the line of combat contact that we were talking about previous week, so which confirms that the Russians are moving. This is not like the geolocation confirming the Russian control over Sokol, but at least this video confirms that the Russians currently in a very, let's say, tight focus in this area, trying to destroy the Ukraine positions trenches and to suppress the Ukrainian forces and to start the ground operation. During the day, we had reports that the Russians have already entered the village by the name of Nova Mykolaivka, and that there are very heavy clashes for the first buildings. We are not changing the map because it's not like very reliable sources. And we had more reports that the Russians entered the village by the name of Umanska, also the southern part. But the strange thing that during the previous weeks we have already received updates that the Russians entered the village, but now they entered the village once again. So for now, this area is covered with a gray zone, and we have questions whether the Russians entered or not and what is the current status. Karlovka and then Nitailova. We have adjusted the map according to the yesterday geolocations. If you remember, yesterday lots of sources reported that, including pro-Ukrainian, that Nitailova fell and that Ukrainians were forced to fall back. But starting today, we continue receiving videos of very heavy clashes in the central part of the village, that there are still Ukrainians. On this video, we can see abandoned armored vehicle of armored forces of Ukraine that was damaged and destroyed by the Russian FPV drone. This video, first of all, confirms that the Russians currently don't have forces, don't have power to evacuate this, let's say, armored vehicle, because there are still Ukrainian soldiers in the vicinity of the area, and there were very high risk of being attacked by them if the Russians start this evacuation. But regarding this attempts, regarding the things, the sources continue reporting that the Russians are moving further to the west. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, today we got the final confirmation that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Semyonovka. That means that the Russians managed to establish control, to clear the area, and to force the Ukrainians to fall back as far as possible from the village. So most likely the configuration of the map doesn't correspond to the reality, and most likely these fields are already in the gray zone. And I believe that tomorrow or the day after, the Russians will confirm the complete control over Berdych as well. After these two villages are captured by the Russians, then the Russians will be able to move further to the west and to start the real clashes and the real battle for the villages like Nova Umanska and the village by the name of Nova Mykolaivka. Let's move further to Karlovka. We have some updates from this territory. As you can see, another important thing is that the focus is moving further and further to the west. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional videos of the FPV drone strikes on the Ukraine armored vehicles and personnel carriers in the vicinity of the Karlovka water reservoir, and which confirms that the Russians do have fire control and FPV drone control over this territory. This also confirms that Ukrainians try to find a solution how to redeploy additional forces on this bank of Karlovka water reservoir. We remember that the dam in this area was destroyed, and currently the Ukrainians suffer some problems with logistics. But anyway, I believe they have some solutions how to redeploy forces, but most of the forces, as you can see, can be destroyed by the Russians on their move to Nitailova. Krasnogorovka, we got a lot of very interesting details, and today we got the final confirmation that the Russians established control over the Minich house. If you remember, during the previous days, we got just a telegram message without any, let's say, videos confirming this, but today we got the first geolocated video of how the Russians managed to capture and how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians inside of this Minich house, and how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians in the vicinity and inside of the trenches. So we have adjusted the map based on that video, and now this map, this configuration of Krasnogorovka is like most likely 90% of the reality. And today we got also a few more updates. This is very interesting video. The Russians discovered another Ukrainian mortar position, and as a result of counter-artillery duel, the mortar position was destroyed. Now we see that the Russians have certain focus on this area, which confirms that the Russians started declaring operation of the Gabzarya Street, which confirms that most likely during the next few days after the end of declaring operation, the Russians will try to move further to the west with the purpose to answer the first buildings on that street and to start the process of the cauldron creation. Furthermore, we have additional update from the railways. If you remember, during the previous days we were talking about the Russian activity along the railways. These railways goes from Krasnogorovka to Gostre, the town that located to the west very far, but we see the Russian focus, which confirms that most likely during the next few days the Russians will try to attack on these directions, trying to understand where exactly the Ukrainians are able to stop the Russians. This is very important direction of attack, because yet we haven't received any more or less reliable information information about the situation that currently is taking place in the fields between Krasnogorovka, between the coal mine, between the northwestern part of Mariinka and the northern part of Georgievka. There is a very rich network of fortifications in this area, and this is the vital question for the Russians to take under control these, let's say, fields and tree lines. So the Russians need to attack further to the west with the purpose to cut the supply and support that goes to fields, to this network of the fortifications, and then they will be able to capture this territory completely. So most likely the Russians are going to do something like this also in the very near future. Nova Mykolaivka, we got another day of complete operational pause, no progress from the Russian side, no attempts to attack Konstantinovka. We stopped receiving FAPS arrivals, we stopped receiving the videos of, Lemur missiles, of FPV drone strikes, so most likely the Russians, main Russian forces left the territory for rotation or for some rest, to get some rest, but most likely in a week or 2 or 3 they will renew their offensive with the purpose to cut Konstantinovka from the north and from the south. Despite the complete absence of activity in Konstantinovka and Paraskovivka, we continue receiving significant number of updates from Vuhledar direction. The Russians continue clearing the area with FPV drones, with Iskanders, with FAPS, with every types of weapon they have. They continue hunting the Ukrainian armored vehicles. First of all, the videos confirms the real line of combat contact and the, let's say, presence of Ukrainian forces among the trees, and most likely this activity also confirms the Russian plans to start offensive on this direction in the very near future. South Donetsk direction, the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, no changes during the previous 24 hours on the ground, just activities, aviation activity, artillery strikes on Urozhaine from the north to the south. Zaporozhye area, we haven't received almost anything from the direction, just few total and tower strikes in the fields between Mala Takmachka, Rabotina and Verbova. No attempts from the Russian side to clear the area on the ground. Kherson direction, the Ukrainian sources reported that as a result of offensive operation or landing operation, they managed to establish control over additional island in this area. We will adjust the map based on that report before the next video, but the thing is that according to most of the mappers, this island used to be in the gray zone, so the Ukrainians managed to maintain the area. The question is, what were the real purposes of the Ukrainians, whether they wanted just another media victory, trying to show that the Ukrainians also can achieve some results on the ground, or that was like a small puzzle of a very big plan of the armed forces of Ukraine for further offensive operation on Russian bank of Dnipro River. So currently we don't have answer to this question. Now we're moving back to Chasiv Yar. We have a lot of very interesting updates. When talking about Chasiv Yar itself, there are very heavy clashes, not very heavy clashes, there are very heavy, big Russian activity on the eastern part. Russians continue bombing the area with FAPs, with artillery, with FAP 1500. The buildings, let's say the Russians are reducing the buildings to ruins, but no attempts to attack the area on the ground. As you can see, we have adjusted the map in the eastern part of Chasiv Yar, if you remember, and according to most of the mappers, this part of Chasiv Yar is already under Russian control, but today we got the final confirmation that most likely during the previous days the Russians were forced to fall back from the area, so that's why we have returned the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. So now the eastern Chasiv Yar is under complete Ukrainian control. Furthermore, we have very interesting video from Seversky Donetsk Donbass canal. On this video we can see how the Russians were bombing the central part, and the most important from this video is the trenches and the line of defense, the fortification line that goes along the Seversky Donetsk Donbass canal. Very powerful fortifications that the Russians are trying to understand how to crack this net, so it's not going to be a very easy job to attack Chasiv Yar in front. So that's why the Russians are trying to find the solution, how to bypass and how to semi-encircle Chasiv Yar from the south and southeast. On this video we can see another tank that armed forces of Ukraine were trying to send to the line of combat contact to support forces, but the tank was destroyed either by FPV drone strike or maybe anti-tank missile. So the roads, the main supply road that goes from central Chasiv Yar to the eastern bank of Seversky Donetsk Donbass canal is already under complete Russian control, but there are still a lot of forces and still the clashes isn't going. Klishchiivka, the Russians, let's say, we can say, intensified their activity on the direction. The Russians during the previous 24 hours bombed significant number of Ukrainian positions, trying to reduce their possibilities to break their defense. And after another artillery preparation, the Russians launched an offensive operation on the ground. And this is very important video of today. The Russians, after a successful attack in Krasnogorovka, the Russian forces all over the line of combat contact start using the tactics of the turtle tank. This is the very heavy tank that the Russians add additional, let's say, armor, significant level of armor, and the Ukrainian sources are saying that currently they don't have possibilities, they don't have a solution how to destroy tanks with this armor, with additional armor. The Ukrainians are saying that there was an attack by the Russians where were involved up to 2-3 tanks and 4-5 personnel armored carriers, and the Ukrainians are saying that that attack was the turtle tank was in the head of that convoy with significant number of electronic warfare equipment. And the Ukrainians, of course, at the beginning decided to destroy the tank, that armored tank, because they needed to suppress electronic warfare before, let's say, further attempts to attack. But the Ukrainians are saying that they used significant number of FPV drones and they managed to destroy or even damage, not even destroy, just one tank and one personnel carrier, and the rest of units were able to get the line of combat contact, to land the infantry and to capture this or that fortification area. Anyway, this just words. According to our understanding, the Russians were moving, let's say, in this direction, and most likely the Russians were heading towards this line, this rich network of fortifications, with the purpose to establish complete control over them. And most likely the Russians managed to achieve some results. And as I understand, currently the Russians are trying to get the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal and to establish control over it. Let's say something like this. This is currently the primary Russian target. First of all, to split the defense belt in two pieces, like Klishchiivka defense belt is one part and the Chasiv Yar itself is the second part, and after that to handle with both pieces separately, or even to encircle the Ukrainians in Klishchiivka. Sever's direction, the Russians continue artillery preparation along the Avdiivka railway station, and the Russians continue bombing Bilogorovka without any attempts to start the ground operation. So it's very difficult, let's say, fortifications, as we know. So for now, the Russians are still not ready to do anything. South in Kupiansk direction, the Ukrainians conducted successful counterattacks on Terny direction, and the Russians were forced to fall back. Kislovka-Kotlarovka area, the Russians continued their offensive operation, but I was very surprised when I read the Ministry of Defense report today, because today I expected that the Russians would continue their offensive operation. But when talking about the losses the Ukrainians suffered on this direction during the previous 24 hours, they lost 50 soldiers in comparison with the losses of 2 days ago, when they lost more than 200, around 300 soldiers, which confirms that that was just one short attack from the Russian side. Very successful, probably unexpected. The Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to enter Kislovka and to establish control over the first buildings. But from now on, the Russians are not moving further. They decided to bomb and to attack, but now they have a foothold on the Ukrainian side, which of course will ease their further progress to Kotlarovka and further progress to establish complete control over Kislovka. But for now, the situation is like as is. The Russians are staying on the ground, and the Russian artillery is pummeling and bombing the Ukrainians in the western part of Kislovka and Kotlarovka itself. Some sources reported that the Russians captured the fields between Pishchana and Tabaevka, but for now we haven't received any updates confirming this, and we have that the Russians managed to basically maintain the gray zone, and they captured the, let's say, lowlands, and for now the Ukrainians controlled the hills around the Russian positions, and there were no attempts to storm the hills. Sinkovka, Kupiansk direction, no updates during the previous 24 hours. The Russians continue bombing and attack in Kharkiv. We got another video of how the Russians discovered the temporary positions of Ukrainians, and as a result of Iskander strikes, those positions were damaged and destroyed. Also, we have the Russian Lancet flying in the area and hunting the Ukrainian air defense systems and the raiders. So everything is going to the beginning of Kharkiv offensive operation, and the Western sources are saying that the operation is going to start in the late May or in the beginning of June. But today we got also another very interesting report. The Russians are about to finish the building of airfield right along the border with Kharkiv. So these are the satellite pictures of how when the Russians started building this airfield in the late 2022, and in the next few months or even days the Russians are about to finish the construction of this airfield. And important thing that this airfield is geolocated, as you can see, very close to the line of combat contact, which confirms that when talking about the current configuration of the front line, it will be impossible for the Russians to use this airfield. And most likely these photos confirms that the Russians are going to create a secure zone, because if the Russians are going to use this airfield, and the airfield is very big with a very big, let's say, airfield line more than 9 kilometers, that means that that secured area should be all over the entire eastern Ukraine. So to use that airfield, there should be no Ukrainians in this area. And this is the main, let's say, important thing about that airfield. And most likely this airfield is built by the Russians for the purpose to start attacks on the eastern part, to get as close as possible to the area, and when the eastern Ukraine will be secured. Kyiv, we have lots of updates. Today we got Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, arrived in Kyiv. He had lots of discussions with Zelensky himself. According to him, when the time is right, Ukraine will immediately become a member of NATO, but not now. Obviously, he was telling that first Ukraine needs to win war with Russia, and after that, everything will be. NATO members choosing between military assistance to Kyiv and their own weapons must choose Ukraine. Of course, he understands that if Ukraine loses, it's not going to be the loss of, let's say, Ukraine or NATO. First of all, it's going to be his personal loss. As a head of NATO, of course, it's a very big problem for his career, maybe for his ambitions, of course. But it's very difficult to understand why ambitions cost more than thousands and thousands of losses among Ukrainians. Also, we have lots of updates from that discussion, but the most important is that Ukrainians are not going to become members of NATO this summer, and most likely the Ukrainians are not going to become the members of the European Union as well. But according to Zelensky, Ukraine has fulfilled all the necessary conditions for the real start of negotiations. So now let's see what the Western countries are able to provide Ukraine in this question, on this matter. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.